When you hear about the Baha'i Faith, the first thing that probably comes to mind is its beautiful message of unity and peace. But as we'll see, the source material reveals a much more complicated story, one of really deep internal conflict that's been there almost from the beginning.
So, let's start with that big idea, the one that draws so many people in, the oneness of humanity. The central goal is to bring everyone, all the world's peoples, together into one peaceful global society. And honestly, it's a powerful and incredibly hopeful vision.
But then you start digging into the history and you find quotes like this. It paints a totally different picture, doesn't it? A reality not of perfect harmony, but of dissension and schism. And this isn't a recent thing. This goes way back to the faith's earliest days.
And that right there is the big question we're tackling. How does a religion that's literally built on the idea of unity end up with such serious divisions? We're going to investigate by looking at the history of its leadership and the dissent that seemed to follow at every single turn.
Okay, first things first, let's look at that foundational promise of unity and the special mechanism that was designed to protect it, because this is really where the story of all the internal struggles gets started.
So, to try and prevent these kinds of divisions from ever happening, the founder, Baha'u'llah, created something called the Covenant. You can think of it as a sacred contract, a clear line of succession that was meant to be the one, ultimate, unquestionable source of authority for every Baha.
And this is the key to understanding everything that follows. Unity wasn't just a nice idea, it was actually hardwired into the faith through obedience. According to this passage, recognizing and obeying the leader wasn't just a suggestion, it was the first duty, the most important thing you could do.
So you have this master plan for unity, right? The Covenant. Well, it got put to the test immediately. The very first major challenge came right after Baha'u'llah passed away, and it came from inside his own family.
In his will, Baha'u'llah named his oldest son Abdul-Baha as his successor. Simple enough. But the will also said that his younger son, Mirza Muhammad Ali, was supposed to succeed Abdul-Baha. You can probably see where this is going. This setup created an instant power struggle between the two brothers.
And Abdul-Baha's response? It wasn't about finding a middle ground or reconciliation. It was swift and it was severe. He excommunicated his own brother and his supporters, branding them with a label that would become incredibly important in the Baha'i faith, violators of the covenant, or covenant breakers.
Now, this family drama, this first big split, it wasn't just a one-off thing. It actually set the template for an even bigger, more complicated fight over who should lead the faith. A fight that, in many ways, is still going on today.
Okay, let's trace the line of leadership, because this is where things get really interesting. It was supposed to be clear, from Baha'u'llah to his son Abdul-Baha, then to his grandson Shoghi Effendi, who was named the Guardian. But here's the twist. The chain broke. Shoghi Effendi died without naming a new guardian. And in that vacuum, an elected body was formed to lead the faith, the Universal House of Justice, or UHJ.
And this is where you find the root of so much of the modern conflict. According to critics in the source material, the UHJ isn't a legitimate continuation of that original covenant. They claim its process isn't a real election, but more of a selection, creating this entrenched all-male elite. And the result, they argue, is an institution that demands unquestioning obedience.
And if you want to understand the level of obedience we're talking about, just listen to this quote. This statement from a Baha'i counselor suggests that your own individual perception, your own eyes and ears, should take a back seat to the institution itself.
So you can imagine, this argument over who's in charge wasn't just some quiet academic debate. No, it led to the formation of a whole bunch of different Baha'i groups, each one claiming that they are the ones following the true path. And you end up with all these different factions. You've got the Orthodox Baha'is, who say the line of guardians has to continue. Then there are groups like the BUPC, who follow a specific person they believe is the living guardian. And then you have others, like Reform and Unitarian Baha'is, who are pushing for a more modern take that puts individual conscience first.
So, we've talked about the big picture, the politics of it all, but what does this actually mean for the people involved? What happens when an individual Baha'i decides to openly question the mainstream leadership?
Well, they get hit with that term we heard earlier, covenant breaker, the same label Abdul-Baha used against his own family. It is the most severe punishment in the faith, and it comes with absolutely devastating consequences.
And according to the source material, there's a pretty clear process for how this happens. It can start with just questioning the leadership. If you don't back down, you can be formally kicked out,
And once you're labeled a covenant breaker, the entire community, we're talking friends, neighbors, even your own family, is told to shun you, to completely cut off all contact.
You can only imagine how devastating this is. This quote from a former member really paints the picture of being completely abandoned and isolated. They describe a painful 3-year process just to get out of a community that was once their entire world. You know, the scholar Juan Cole, who used to be a prominent Baha'i, he really boils it down to this one central conflict. He says that when you become a Baha'i, you're essentially making your own conscience hostage to the dictates of the leadership. And that seems to fly in the face of the Baha'i principle of independently investigating the truth for yourself.
So, at the end of the day, it all comes down to this really tough question. The covenant, the very thing that was created to protect the faith's unity, is seen by dissenters as the main tool used to crush dissent and enforce conformity. And it raises a question that goes way beyond just one religion. When does protecting the group's unity cross the line into suppressing an individual's conscience?